All right, I'm with Bob Moriarty, and we have a lot to talk about. I don't know if we can fit this in an hour, Bob. This is a lot today. Good morning or good afternoon to you in Europe. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing very well.
Okay, so a lot to delve into. I'm not sure where to start, but just as we were about to hit the record button, we were talking about Ukraine and the fiasco in Alaska. We had a Putin flying to Alaska to a military base, and then Trump saying how great a meeting it was, even though they canceled the lunch. And then Monday, the circus goes to D.C., all the European leaders in the Oval Office. And again, Trump is applauding it as an incredible meeting, so much progress being made. The European leaders also kind of said they felt like progress was being made, but the war, all the stuff that I see, Russia's bombing more than ever. The war is raging in Ukraine. There's no peace deal here. This is just Trump being a junior mining CEO talking about how great everything is while the whole thing is burning down.
Strange enough, Donald Trump sees himself as a cross between Superman and a used car salesman. And the most interesting thing about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and the meeting they had with Trump on Monday, if you go back and you look at the picture, every one of the seven dwarfs looked as if somebody had taken a corn cob and poked them in the butt. Okay. They were really upset. And literally, I'm seeing intelligence reports saying since there's no ceasefire agreement, they're talking about sending NATO troops into Ukraine to protect Ukraine. And of course, that's what the whole war was about in the first place. Okay, Russia.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay, so this is what I don't get, Bob. The whole, Alaska thing on Friday, supposedly the things that were being floated out ahead of the Friday meeting in Alaska was that Putin had agreed to security guarantees for Ukraine in return for Ukraine signing over the territories in the east. That was what was being floated in the media. I don't see how there's a security guarantee for Ukraine without the U.S. being part of the guarantee. France can't guarantee the security of Ukraine. The Italians can't guarantee the security of Ukraine. Only the U.S. can. So I don't
No. You're ignoring the UK. They got
70,000 troops. Yeah, no. So why would Putin say, okay, U.S., you can put your troops in Ukraine now after 3.5 years of fighting? That didn't make sense to me, and I still don't think he's agreeing to that. I would be shocked if he's agreeing to that. And so whatever happened in Washington on Monday, all these European leaders, they're all saying how great the meeting was. Trump saying how great the meeting was. And now Putin has 2 weeks. It's always 2 weeks, always 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Putin said, okay, we're going to keep bombing. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, strange enough, okay, there's two issues. And I'm going to show you why it does make sense. For the first time in 2.5 years, a NATO leader has actually sat down with Putin to listen to his demands. Now, frankly, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever whether you think he's a good guy or a bad guy. You need to sit down with your enemy and you need to figure out what the rules are to see if there's any common ground. And second of all, on December 21st of 2021, Putin went to NATO and went to the United States and said, we want security guarantees. We want the Minsk II agreement actually enforced. We want the shelling of Donbass to stop. And it was totally ignored. So Putin's understanding of a security agreement is 100% opposed to NATO's understanding of a security agreement. Quite bluntly, you're pointing out something really important. There's been a total flip-flop in the last week. I believed on Monday that Donald Trump told NATO, okay, guys, it's your war. It's not our war. Secretary of State Rubio came out and said, yes, there's a war, but it's not our war. That's what I believed Trump said. However, now NATO is saying we're going to send troops in, and the U.S. is talking about providing air cover.
Well, there's no security guarantee without the U.S. And frankly, I know Ukraine. I know the Ukrainians very well. They're not going to sign over 1 square inch of territory unless they get a lot in return for it. They've already lost hundreds of thousands of lives in this thing. They hate Putin. They're not going to sit at a table with him and say, here, take our territory. We're going to sign it away unless they get a lot in return. And whatever happened in the 90s with Bill Clinton and Yeltsin, they're not going to do that again.
Well, here's the deal, okay, and you just raised an important issue. A third-party group of hackers have hacked into the Ukrainian military, and they're showing 1.7 million dead Ukrainian soldiers and or missing. Now, a lot of the missing would be people who deserted, but certainly the Ukrainians have lost well over 1.2, 1.3 million troops, which I think is a travesty. You know how I am about asking questions that are impossible to answer. Take a wild stab at how many French troops were lost in World War I.
World War I. I mean, definitely over 1 million, but I don't know exactly how many.
Okay, that's a really good answer. It's a very honest answer. It's 1.3 million. And to the extent that the Treaty of Versailles actually was the cause of World War II, because of the restrictions on Germany. You can go to any town in France and you go to the mairie, which is their civil headquarters, and there will be some kind of a monument to the French young men who were killed in World War I. It was a catastrophe for France. So multiply that by 2, and that's sort of catastrophe it is for Ukraine. Now, there is one situation in which Ukraine will agree to give up territory.
One situation? I mean, I think they're going to fight to the death on this thing at this point. Unless they get a very firm, security guarantee from the U.S. and investment in rebuilding the country from the U.S. and Europe, I think they'll just fight to the last man, quite frankly.
Well, strange enough, that's exactly what's going to happen. NATO and the United States are willing to allow this war to go on to the death of every Ukrainian soldier. And I think that's criminal, okay, to allow. But I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Russia is clearly winning the war. They've broken through the Ukrainian lines, and it's going to get real serious real quick. I know you and I disagree on this, but Russia was never the aggressor. in this situation. They're not the aggressor now. It's NATO that's the aggressor. It's NATO that doesn't want peace. And they're actually building one of the biggest military bases in Europe, in Romania, to continue the war. Now, that's
saying that, Russia is not the aggressor in Ukraine is like saying at 2 a.m, I break down your window and jump in your house and murder your wife and steal your gold and leave. And then the police say he didn't do anything wrong. He was totally justified in going in your house and murdering your wife and taking your gold.
Okay, have you ever heard of R2P? The letter R, the number 2, the letter P. R2P.
No.
Okay. In 1994, one of the tribes in Rwanda started massacring the Tutsis. Okay. And you could tell the Tutsis because they were tall. And in a period of 3 to 4 months, they massacred somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people, innocent people. Bill Clinton was president of the United States at the time. The United States did absolutely nothing. NATO did nothing. The UN did nothing. And there was this horrendous massacre. After that, the UN passed R2P. And R2P stands for the right to protect. And should another massacre occur like that in Ukraine, where part of the government is in a civil war against another part of the government, and they massacre 14,000 people, neighborhood countries would have the right to protect. Now, the origin of the war in Ukraine was not 2014. It was 1990 when the United States agreed not to expand NATO 1 inch to the east. Now, under Bill Clinton's administration, they started going to the east, and they now have added 32 countries. Now, there's one more thing that nobody ever talks about, and they should talk about. How familiar are you with the Minsk II agreement?
1994?
No, it's 2015.
Oh, Minsk II. No, I don't know that one.
Okay, Minsk II was a temporary ceasefire between Ukraine and the breakaway states in the east. And one of the key provisions in Minsk II was the right to self-determination. And it was stated, and you can go to Wikipedia and look up Minsk II, that the breakaway republics would have the right of self-determination. They could determine who they should be part of. Now, at 2014, 2015, there was an illegal government in Kiev. The United States spent $5 billion setting up a
I know you're going to use all these Kremlin talking points, Bob. The
not
reality,
yeah,
they are.
Points. They're human talking points.
No, they're not. So, Russia is a soulless, corrupt nation that,
unlike Ukraine,
that really instigated the conflict in the East, starting in 2014, starting with invading Crimea, February 2014. That was an illegal invasion. The UN agrees it was illegal. So this rewriting of history using an example from Africa in the 90s is a stretch, to say the least. A very
wait a minute. International law provides for the right to protect.
So if I decide
agreement
that you might be that you as my neighbor might be a threat to me at some point in the future, I'm going to go in and kill you first, and that's justified.
No, if you start shelling my house, and shooting my dog, I have a right to protect.
The whole thing in the East is really a red herring, and there's a lot about, oh, they're Russian speaking, it's persecution of Russian speaking. Ukraine is Russian speaking. All the Ukrainians, even the ones in the West, are fluent in Russian. So just because some might speak Ukrainian as their first language doesn't mean they're not Russian speaking. The country is Russian speaking. So there's no persecution of Russian speaking people. This is a nonsense thing that Putin made up as an excuse. And it continues to be trotted out.
Did Putin make up the government in Kiev outline the Russian Orthodox Church?
Yeah, after they invaded in 2022.
But wait a minute,
Bob.
it's the fucking church.
It's a corrupt joke of a church, just like the Catholic Church. It's corrupt. When the patriarch of the church is wearing a solid gold Rolex, he's not a man of the cloth. He's a corrupt Putin stooge, and you know it.
Oh, don't get me started on churches and religions. Okay, let's say that we agree to disagree. You have pointed out a very important point, and that is NATO and the United States are willing to fight this war to the death of the last Ukrainian. Now, I happen to think that's something terrible, and I wish there was peace. And if the United States hadn't lied in 1990, and Ukraine hadn't lied in 2014 and 2015, and if there hadn't been 7 ceasefires that Ukraine broke, we wouldn't have 1.7 million dead Ukrainians. And I regret the deaths of any Russian soldiers, and I regret the deaths of any Ukrainian soldiers, and what is effectively a civil war that is frankly none of our.
It's not a civil war
business.
Because the
Of course
Ukrainians
it's a civil
want
war.
nothing to do with the Russians. They don't see them as brothers. Okay, absolutely not a civil war. Russia is a soulless, corrupt mafia nation run by a gangster murderer. And there's nothing
like Ukraine
that's going to convince me otherwise. Yeah, I mean, you could say that, Bob, but Putin is the one who put 175,000 troops and tanks on the border and invaded all directions, all different parts of the country. It wasn't just the East. And you can try to justify that. But being an anti-war man, justifying that action, you lose all credibility because then you're no longer anti-war. You're basically justifying what happened, what you're saying, the million Ukrainians, the million Russians, you're justifying those deaths now.
I'm not justifying those deaths. What I'm saying is, if Ukraine hadn't lied, if France hadn't lied, had Germany not lied, had the United States not lied, now you can call Putin and Russia corrupt, but they're not sending $50 million a month to the UAE like Zelensky is, who is not in office legally. Zelensky's term of office ended in May of last year. So however corrupt Russia is, Ukraine is more corrupt.
Okay, all right. So they're all corrupt. Okay, we can agree to that. Okay, I can agree to that. I can agree my own country is corrupt. Let's move on. Let's talk about more corruption. So the Epstein list, there's more corruption there. What did you read?
Wait. The Zell Maxwell just came out, says definitively there's no Epstein list.
I know, this is the story now. Trump said there's no Epstein list, and he's not on it.
Right, exactly. Okay. I would highly encourage anyone who needs a nice piece of humor in their life to read what Zell Maxwell had to say about Epstein. The cameras in the $400 million place in New York City was only to prevent people from stealing things. The 10,000 videos, okay, showed no sex activities with young children. All of the 13 and 14-year-olds who were raped, it was consensual. Donald Trump was the nicest person in the world. Would never.
You can't have consensual sex with a 12-year-old. That's not even possible.
No. Donald Trump made it clear that 12 was too young. 13 was okay.
Oh, 13. Okay. You can't have consensual sex with a 13-year-old. I'm not even sure that's possible in some of the countries that allow sex with younger people. I think 13 is too young everywhere.
Well, it was the most amazing interview because, according to Ghislaine Maxwell, there were no crimes committed.
Yeah, so she's singing the gospel now, trying to get out of prison, trying to make nice with the deep state and the powers that be and the names that are on the list to try to get out. So it seems to me like she's going to be pardoned soon.
Strange enough, that's what it certainly appears to me. And to the extent that the Trump administration keeps doing things that I believe make it worse. Okay. The interview was so absurd, saying there was no crime. There were no young children who were sexually abused. Nobody did anything. There were no photographs. There were no videos. All of the testimony of everybody who said something bad happened, they were all lying. And Epstein had no connection to intelligence services. Really? Really? Are you kidding? Excuse me, Ghislaine. Your dad was one of the most important Mossad agents in history, and there was no connection to intelligence agencies. There were no recordings. You're not blackmailing Donald Trump today. Are you kidding?
Yeah. No, it's absurd. It's completely absurd, and she's rewriting, history in an attempt to get out of jail free card, and it's probably going to work because
I think
all signs are that this current president had many dealings with Epstein and was very close to him for a number of years in the late 90s and early 2000s, and then they had a falling out. Something to do with the first lady, Trump's current wife, and something that Epstein did that Trump didn't like, although it's not clear what that was, but they had a falling out, and clearly he became dead to Trump at some point in the mid to late 2000s, and then he got in trouble. It's interesting how the falling out appeared to occur sometime around 2005 or 2006, and then Epstein got in trouble with the feds in 2008. So there's some speculation that Trump may have become an informant at some point there.
Strange enough, I think there's something to that. Now, the latest story from Donald Trump is that the woman in Australia who just died, who testified that she had sex with Prince Andrew, she was working for Donald Trump, and Epstein recruited her, and it pissed Donald Trump off. And there's another story that Epstein and Donald Trump were bidding on some property in Palm Beach, and Epstein undercut Trump, and that pissed him off. But the idea that there were no crimes committed and there were no victims and there is no proof is patently absurd. Okay, on the face, it's obvious. And here's what's amazing. The FBI could turn around and charge her with perjury tomorrow, and all they would have to do is show some of the tapes of the sexual exploits that she maintains didn't take place. But when she was tried, and I don't understand the exact sequence, she was evidently charged with lying and convicted of lying. So she is a convicted liar. But yes, I think she just negotiated her get out of jail card.
Yeah, let's talk about Washington, D.C. and what the Trump administration appears to be doing in Washington, D.C. So probably most Americans, and certainly non-Americans, probably don't know this, but Washington, D.C. is not a state. It's a district. It's a federal district that was created to basically house the capital, all the federal buildings and federal government. So it's not like New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles, which are big cities that are inside of states and have their own state government and city governments and law enforcement. Washington, D.C. is very different, and actually the law enforcement is largely federal. So what is Trump doing in Washington, D.C. with the National Guard and the military?
Well, there's two issues here. The most important issue is there a serious crime problem in Washington, D.C.? And I think that anyone who pays any attention would say yes, of course. There's no question whatsoever. The union has come out and said, look, the guys running the police department are covering up the statistics, and the crime is far worse than anyone is saying. So Donald Trump has decided that he's going to clean up the city, and he's going to use federal troops, military troops, to do that. And it's one of those good news, bad news stories. If you were being overrun by mosquitoes, could you use a shotgun to kill them?
Not effective.
Well, it would cause a lot of damage, but if you take a shotgun to a mosquito, it's going to be pretty damn effective. Okay.
Well, you're probably going to miss it though with a shotgun, because it's a bunch of smaller rounds. You're probably going to miss the mosquito.
Well, you use 2 or 3 rounds, nothing to it.
Okay.
But what he's doing is exceptionally dangerous, because how do you look at someone and tell if they're a criminal? If you catch them in the act, okay, you could stop it. But if you don't catch them in the act, how do you look at someone and determine if they're a criminal? The answer is you can't. However, if you send troops into Washington, or we had also talked about Mexico, if you attack Mexico, a sovereign nation, and go after the cartels don't have headquarters, okay? They don't have military bases. So how do you attack them effectively? And the answer is you can't. But what you really have done is you make targets of yourself, and you use the analogy of Vietnam, and that was absolutely accurate. So while I applaud the intent to reduce crime in Washington, D.C., I'm not sure that making U.S. soldiers targets is an effective solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, ridiculous. And I guess they can try Washington, D.C. as an experiment, because, again, this is basically a city that was made to house the federal government. And they can do this sort of experiment there because they have more jurisdiction there. But to use like the U.S. military in New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles would be probably a bridge too far. I mean, there's certainly a lot that can be done at the law enforcement level in terms of changing and improving law enforcement before that would have to be done. And what you're doing, let's say you use the U.S. Army in Chicago to restore law and order. What you're basically doing is you're acknowledging that you have a broken country, and you're using your own military inside your own country. It's
Yeah,
it's bad.
and that's pretty scary. It suggests, and I tend to believe, and it's just my opinion, I tend to believe we're a lot closer to a civil war in the United States than anybody wants to talk about. Some cities like LA, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle are literally crime zones where the mob is ruling, and the economic effects are very dangerous. I don't like the idea of making the military targets, whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's in Chicago. I don't think that's the proper use of them. They should be defending the country, and going after something that's nebulous as street crime. That's the job of the police.
Yeah, no, I mean, using the military is not trained to make arrests. That's not what they do. They're trained to kill and take ground and seize territory, and be effective in those ways, not to make arrests and supervise the citizens of a country. That's not what their training is. And so I think this is a bridge too far. This is an overreach by the Trump administration. But he likes the military because it's federal. He has the jurisdiction over it. He can say it's a national emergency and mobilize the troops, and he likes to flex his muscle like that. You said something about jobs and the economy. Let's talk about that. So yesterday, Chairman Powell made a apparent pivot, something that Trump would have been pleased to see, but of course Trump didn't admit he was pleased and continued to berate Powell for being too late. This is interesting because I wasn't exactly expecting this much of a pivot. I thought the Fed is going to cut in September, but I didn't think Powell would make it so obvious that the Fed is going to cut in September. He made it very obvious at Jackson Hole, and gold loved this, and the dollar sold off. And I kind of think that Powell basically gave the green light to buy hard assets and sell the dollar. What are your thoughts on the Powell pivot?
Well, we are 100% in agreement there. I think it's an absolute mistake. I think that if you're going to have a Federal Reserve, it should be independent of political impact. And Donald Trump has, I talked about Donald Trump being a cross between a used car salesman and Superman. Donald Trump is taking on things that have nothing to do with the presidency. There is nothing in the Constitution that says the presidency is in charge of interest rates. There's nothing in the Constitution that says it's appropriate for the president to sell $249 perfume and $499 cellular or cell phones. It's not appropriate for the president to get involved in cryptocurrencies. But can I talk about the good news?
Sure.
There is a God.
Oh, yeah?
I can prove it. Not only can I prove there is a God, I can prove she has a sense of humor.
Okay.
What happened in New York City this week with Donald Trump and his fraud conviction?
Oh, they threw out a fine?
Well, here's what they did. Letta James charged Donald Trump with 34 criminal counts of fraud in misstating his income and the value of his properties. And what's important here is to understand the context in which she did that. If you went to 100 real estate developers in New York City, how many of them would overstate their income and the value of their properties?
Probably 100% of them.
100%, exactly. Okay. Now, do you happen to recall how much damage was done as a result of the fraud from the Trump team?
None.
It's important. We got a case of fraud. Okay.
Right.
Agree that fraud can't exist.
None. Because the loan was repaid, and there was no damage.
There was no damage. There were no victims to the fraud.
So now, usually the government would not prosecute a case like that, even if there was fraud proven to have occurred. They wouldn't prosecute unless there's a victim.
Right, exactly true. So what happened was, and this is where it gets really interesting, the judge in the case, who clearly was anti-Trump, at the end of the trial and conviction on 34 counts, issued a civil fine of $354 million, and it included interest going back to the birth date of Donald Trump's great-great-great-grandfather. So including the interest, it was about $500 million. And an intermediate court said, look, I mean, it's absurd to charge this guy $500 million for something which there was no crime committed with the victim. So we'll lower that to $175 million. So the original amount was $354 million. The total amount, including the interest going back to the birth date of his great-great-great-grandfather, rose it to $500 million. And a court said, no, $175 million is fine. Now, what's really interesting here is that the judge in the case, after hearing weeks of testimony, knew exactly how liquid Donald Trump was. And the purpose of the fine was to make sure he couldn't appeal the case. Now, somebody came up and gave Donald Trump $175 million so he could write a check to New York State. And I will maintain that whoever wrote the check for $175 million to Donald Trump now owns Donald Trump. Now, remember what I said, that I could prove that there is a God and she has a sense of humor?
Yes.
Okay. Guess who the feds are now investigating for fraud in misstating assets on mortgage applications?
A few people, including a Fed governor, Cook.
Even better.
Letitia
Who brought the
James.
charges against Donald Trump?
Yeah, Letitia James.
Exactly. She's being investigated because she committed exactly the same fraud that she convicted Donald Trump of. So I go back to my original thesis. There is a God, and she has a sense of humor.
Yeah, what's funny is this happens over and over again in the world, where the accuser, the one who's acting so high and mighty, as if they have this moral white cloth in their lives, is usually also guilty of some of the same things that they accuse others of. In fact, the reason why they're able to accuse others is they know it very well themselves.
Well, let me stop you right there. Do you understand what projection is?
Yes, projection.
Psychological terms.
Yes.
Projection is you take what you're guilty of and how you would react, and you charge somebody else with exactly the same thing. That's projection. And strangely enough, and I there's a lot of things about Trump I like, and there's a lot of things that I don't like, but that entire case was fraud. It was politically motivated in the first place, and it's going to turn around and bite James right on the butt.
Yeah, that seems quite likely. Just about 10 minutes more, Bob. I have an email from you in June saying you have to look at this stock and you should talk to the CEO and maybe do an interview with her, because this is a very interesting technology this company has. And I took a look at it. I did email the CEO, but unfortunately she was traveling that week, and then I was traveling the next week, and we never connected. And the stock was Hydrograph Clean Power. And this stock went from 20 cents in June, the end of June, to a high about a week ago of $3.72. How did you know this was going to be a 19x, Bob?
Well, strange enough, I didn't. And what I'll say, what's really interesting, the stock has gone nowhere in 4 years. Okay. Now, I looked at it, and I will say that if what they claim is true, it's one of the most important advances in technology in history. It's equivalent to the invention of the transistor. Okay. Now, how close, if you had to put your hands on a transistor, how long would it take you to do?
A transistor?
Yeah.
Probably not long, a minute or less. Oh, in your ear. Okay, yeah.
No, everything electronic is nothing but transistors.
Okay.
Okay. And we forget that. And my analogy when I spoke to her with Jay Taylor was that the transistor was invented in 1949. Okay. In 1958, I actually spent $20 buying a 6-transistor radio. And you're a little too young to remember it, but the really greatest time in music in American history was the 50s, 60s, and 70s, because music became portable because of the transistor. But the entire computer revolution is based on the transistor. Now, if graphene is what the company claims, it is this incredible device. Now, my problem with it is, and I said in the interview, that the company needs to go from the theoretical into the practical. Okay, it's nice to talk about we've got this magic substance that can do wonderful things, but you've got to have some kind of application where you're actually doing it. Now, you wouldn't know this, but I've got 13,000 hours of flying, mostly in civilian aircraft, piston engine aircraft. And all these engines were developed in the 30s and 40s, and they're primitive compared to engines of today. But putting graphene into oil reduces friction by 70 to 80%. And that's just a giant improvement. It would improve gasoline mileage. It would improve performance of engines. It would improve the length of usability of the engines. It would be a giant advancement. You could put it into concrete. You could put it into electronics. You can do all kinds of magic stuff, all of which the company's been saying for 4 years. But then somebody came along who used to work for Sprott, and he just pumped the shit out of that stock. And he was talking about $1,000 stock.
I saw the $1,000 price target. I saw that.
If what they say is true, I will concede that's possible. But when it ran up to $3 in the high $3 range, it brought the short sellers out in force.
Right.
So they took the stock. I think the absolute high was $3.95. I think it took it down to $1.40 or something like that.
$1.40, yeah, from 3.72 to $1.40, and then it bounced back to $2 on Thursday and Friday.
Yeah, it's one of the most dangerous stocks that I've ever seen. It would be a wonderful, wonderful stock to trade, and if it's true, it's going to make a lot of people rich. But unfortunately, some of the things in the short sellers thing seem to be true. Okay, they've gone 4 years and they've never signed a contract or sold anything. They've sold, I think, $6,000 worth of graphene last year. So it's something that could be extraordinary, or it could be one more pump and dump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whenever I see price targets that would infer a market cap in the hundreds of billions for a CSE listed company, I get skeptical. I think everybody should be skeptical. But that being said, you told me about this stock in June when it was 20 cents. So regardless of all the other stuff, it was a hell of a trade. Unfortunately, I didn't take advantage of your idea, but a hell of a move here in Hydrograph. And yeah, I think from a trading standpoint, the volatility is exceptional if you're a trader, if you can navigate the volatility in the stock. But obviously, as you said, it is extremely dangerous and treacherous when you have, on one side, you have a cult of bulls who think this is the cure to cancer and the greatest thing since the invention of the wheel. And then you have short sellers who are saying the company is a fraud and all the other stuff that they've made up on the negative side. So you have a very explosive situation. Who's going to be right?
Exactly. Would you like another one?
Sure. Yeah, give me another 20x, Bob.
Okay, you're gonna love this, and I am not gonna put a price of $1,000 a share. Okay, Simon Ridgway. Okay, got involved.
Simon Ridgway. Okay.
Okay, Simon Ridgway I've known for 20 years, and he is one of the old timers, and he is one of the giants of the industry. When Snowline exploded last year, Simon looked at it and he said, we need to go take a look at the eastern portion of the Tombstone Belt where Snowline is. And he went out and staked a very large position, a granite intrusive, okay, and did some very, very preliminary work, okay, sampling, and came up with some extraordinary numbers. They showed 550 meters of 1.06 grams. There is no visible gold. Now, Snowline has visible gold, Sitka has visible gold, but Ratka doesn't have any visible gold. However, it does have bismuth, and because I've been up to placer and lode projects in the Yukon and in Alaska, they look for bismuth more than they look for gold, because if you find bismuth, you're going to find gold. Ratka is going to release drill results from the first 3 holes this week. I bought shares in January at 8.6 cents, and it closed yesterday at 79 cents. So it's almost up tenfold already. But could it go up another tenfold? I'm going to suggest to you it is the very best project that I have ever seen in 20 years. And the beauty is you don't need 10 years of drilling to prove it. Okay, they're going to have a total
very
of 5,000.
best project you've seen in 20 years? Really?
Yep.
Hold on, this is in the Northwest Territories, and they need helicopters to get out there to drill. That's not the best. That's not the best location.
That's why it's so cool.
Oh.
That's how he went out and staked this based on nothing. They go to the government. They say, show us the stream samples. They find stream samples with bismuth. They say, we want to go out there in this area. Now, there was some internal political stuff in the Northwest Territories, and they changed the land usage in 2024. But a lot of things happened that were an accident. Now, let me tell you some things that are so simple that everybody can understand. Snowline has 7.3 million ounces right now. Snowline's in the eastern lobe of the Tombstone Belt. It's not in Northwest Territories. It's in the Yukon, near Grad. But Snowline's going to go into production. Okay, the indications that they've had from the drill program this year are that they could easily double that. Okay, if you got a 7 million ounce high grade deposit, you could have it on the moon, and they're going to put the infrastructure in. So Simon was able to pick up Rakla because nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And you were absolutely correct. Drilling a hole in Snowline or in Rakla is $1,000 a meter. Now, if you go to Banyan, it's $300 a meter. It's far more expensive. Helicopter flights in, it costs a fortune. But if
$2,500 an hour to run those helicopters.
Yeah, exactly. It costs a fortune, but it means you need to go for the real giant deposits. Now, you can look at the hill, and it's 500 meters by 500 meters by 400 meters, and there's a zone 550 meters wide of 1.06 grams. If you take 500 times 500 times 400 times 2.6 times 1.06, divide it by 31.14, you come up with 9 million ounces of gold. I believe that at the end of this year, it will be clear that they have a potential for 9 million and perhaps 2 or 3 times that.
So you think Rakla is another Snowline?
No.
You think it's better than Snowline?
Better. Snowline has a market cap of 1.5 million, and it is run by absolutely brilliant people, and they have the ability to double the resource with their drilling. And I think that Rakla is bigger.
Very good. Okay, so you got my attention there, Bob. So I'm going to definitely study the results when they come out and do a deeper dive into Rakla. And the next time we speak, we'll have another conversation about it. Thank you so much for your time today. This is a very wide-ranging conversation. I think we delved into a lot of interesting and controversial topics. And until next time, thank you.
Well, strange enough, I think this is going to be one of the better interviews we've done, and I don't particularly mind. I actually approve of you disagreeing with me, because if I can't justify what I believe, then it's not very valid. So you don't have to agree with me.
Yeah, I don't agree with you on some things. I agree with you on other things, and always appreciate your insights and those 19x ideas that you throw at me from time to time. Definitely need to do a deeper dive into Rakla and also Hydrograph, because obviously there's a significant portion of the investor population that thinks this is the real deal, and they could be right. They could also be wrong. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.